Hello friends, and welcome back to another video. If you are new here, my name is Newt, and in today's video we're going to be going over everything you need to know about Mo Xuan. We'll learn all of the intricacies of the comboing, as well as how to burst and pretty much everything in between. Before we get into everything, let's quickly go over some basics of the class. Mo Xuan is a 2-minute TPM class with a very strong burst. We typically use roar and weapon jump for our burst and mini burst, however continuous is a viable ring if that's all that you have. We are a combo class, so there is definitely a lot to learn to get your damage off consistently. We are a pirate class, and contrary to what you would expect from the class, our main stat is dex, with our secondary stat being strength. Our damage as a whole is made up from a lot of crit damage buffs as well as final damage stacking within our combos. For inner ability, we use 20% cooldown skip top line, and we use boss damage and buff duration for our second and third lines. We are also a cooldown hat class, so you'll want at least -2 seconds on your hat, but you'll want to aim for -4 seconds if you are planning on maining Mo Xuan. If you want to learn about 5th job trios and skill priority, I will be leaving a link to the class Discord in the description where you can look for the infographic and find lots more info on the class. With all of that out of the way, let's learn how to play Mo Xuan. To get started, we're going to take a look at our gauge here. Mo Xuan's gauge is pretty unique compared to other classes in the sense that our gauge is strictly informative. Simply put, the gauge is just there to give you information about your skills and how they're interacting with each other. Mo's gauge has 3 parts to it. You have the inner circle, these 2 little diamonds at the bottom, and the glow that surrounds the whole gauge. These all give you important information as you combo, so let's go over each individually. Starting off with the inner circle, this is simply there to tell you whether you are using a D skill or a Qian skill. D skills are commonly known as kick skills, and Qian skills are known as punch skills. Thinking of them as kick and punch skills will make it much easier to understand what's going on, and we'll go over them in a bit. Moving on to the little diamonds at the bottom, these show you which stance of skill you're currently in. Both your kick and punch skills have 2 stances, first and second stance. Different stances will have different effects with certain skills in our kit, so this will be super important to get familiar with. Finally, we have the glow surrounding the gauge. This is here to show you the outcome of your comboing, and we'll go over this more in a later section. But essentially, this will give you information about how your skills are interacting with each other and whether your combos are having the desired outcome. I know this all sounds a little confusing, but it will make much more sense once we go over our skills, so let's do that now. As I mentioned before, Mo Xuan has 2 types of skills at the base level, punch and kick skills. Every combo skill in our kit will have one of these 2 alignments, and these will be dictated on the skill's icon with these symbols you can see on screen now. Beyond simply kick and punch skills, we also have 4 different art forms, those being Xuan arts, also known as black skills, divine arts, also known as blue skills, secret arts, these are mostly passive movement or survivability skills, and soul arts. You can call these rainbow skills if you'd like, however, I just call these soul arts because they aren't really part of our comboing and don't really need to be simplified for the sake of understanding. Every active skill in Mo's kit will fall into one of these forms, and next I'll go over each in detail. First off, we have our Xuan arts, or black skills. I'll be calling them black skills for the remainder of this video, so we don't get confused, and because Xuan can definitely be a bit of a mouthful sometimes. But black skills are the basic kick and punch skills. There are only 2 of them, and they will be the precursor to all of our combos. Both of these skills have 2 stances, which are shown on the diamonds at the bottom of our gauge, as I mentioned earlier, and will simply rotate between the 2 if pressed repeatedly or held down. If you use any other skill afterwards, the stance will reset and go back to the first stance when pressed again. For example, if I use my black punch skill, it will go into first stance, and if I use it again, it will go into second stance. If, however, I use a black kick skill after the first stance black punch skill, the next punch I throw will be first stance again. This is a super useful technique to ensure you are in the correct stance when comboing. Next, we have secret arts. These skills aren't really something you'll need to actively think about, as they have no real use in comboing or damage, with the one exception being our toggle key projection, but even that will just do damage passively. All of the other skills are either movement skills or survivability skills, and we will go over all of those in future sections. Finally, we have our divine arts or blue skills. I will also be referring to these as blue skills for the remainder of the video for the same reasons as before. I know I said there were also soul arts, but I don't want to shove too much information down your throat right off the bat, so we'll just go over these three for now. Blue skills also have the kick and punch alignment, and you can think of them as the conclusion of a combo, almost like a call and response. You use a black skill to set up the combo, and you conclude it with a blue skill. We call this skill linking. Skill linking on Mo Xuan is much more forgiving than other combo classes like Cadena, as you're given a 3-second window after using a black skill to trigger the blue skill you want to use. Every time you use a blue skill, you must use a black skill of the same type beforehand. So whenever I say use this blue punch skill, it should be implied that you'll be using the associated black punch skill beforehand. We have 6 total blue skills in our kit. 4 general combo skills and 2 burst combo skills. For general combo skills, we have Erupting Flame, Tearing Wind, Righteous Thunder, and Swirling Tide. And for our burst combo skills, we have Howling Storm and Crashing Earth. Erupting Flame and Tearing Wind are basically just simple damage skills that are used to set up additional combos, which we'll talk about soon. But Righteous Thunder and Swirling Tide are much more important. Swirling Tide, a 2-part blue kick skill, is essentially our best DPM skill and will be the vast majority of your off-burst damage. This skill chunks, so you want to make sure you use it every time it's off cooldown. Righteous Thunder, however, is an incredibly valuable skill in Mo Xuan's kit. As if damage isn't valuable, but whatever. Not only does it do a significant amount of damage, but it is also functionally a critical bind. If you've watched my previous guides on Zero, you'll be familiar with this concept, but simply put, this skill acts like a mini bind, stunning bosses for 3 seconds with a separate cooldown from the main bind cooldown. You'll be able to quickly stun a boss every 45 seconds using this skill, so it can essentially be used as a way to either extend your main burst bind or provide a small bind during your mini burst. Crashing Earth is our blue kick burst skill, and this is primarily just a big dump of damage. You will be skill locked for a short period of time, but it's only about a second, so there isn't much to worry about in that regard. Finally, we have Howling Storm, our main burst skill. Howling Storm is a blue punch skill and will make up the bulk of our burst damage. This skill is a key down skill that will lock you in place for roughly 4 seconds while you throw out a flurry of punches, followed by one big punch at the very end. While we are not iframed during this skill, we do take reduced damage and have immunity to status effects while it is active. With this most recent patch, we also got the ability to turn around while this skill is active, which can be very helpful during mini burst when the boss is not bound. Both of these skills have a 1-minute cooldown, and while Crashing Earth is not cooldown skippable, surprisingly Howling Storm is. So if you get really lucky, you can get a lot of damage off during your burst from this skill. Now this is where black skill stance becomes important. Every general combo blue skill wants to be linked with a first stance black skill, and every burst combo blue skill wants to be linked with a second stance black skill. For example, if you're going to use Erupting Flame, a general combo blue punch skill, which skill are we going to link it with? Of course, a first stance black punch skill. To help visualize it, to hopefully make this easier to understand, I've made this little chart to show you which skills fall into which categories. For general combo punch skills, we have Erupting Flame and Righteous Thunder. For general combo kick skills, we have Tearing Wind and Swirling Tide. Finally, for burst combo skills, on the punch side we have Howling Storm, and on the kick side we have Crashing Earth. Now, I know this can all be very intimidating and overwhelming at first. Trust me, Even trying to explain how this works can be complicated at times. Thankfully, Nexon has programmed in some visual aids to help you understand how to link skills when you're first getting started. When I use my black punch skill here, notice how these two skills light up with a glow surrounding the icon in my hotbar. This shows you which skills you can link to with the stance that you're currently in, which right now we are in first stance. Notice if I use my black punch skill twice, those skills are no longer lit up. However, this third skill is now lit up. This shows that this skill can be linked with the second stance, which we are currently in. This is something that will take some time to get used to, and I recommend either finding a quiet spot to practice or just come here to the dojo to practice your combos on a dummy. Now the question arises, why does all of this matter? Why do we want to link our skills in the first place? To explain all that, let's move into our next section and talk about our combos. Let's start off by answering that question. Why do we want to link our skills together? The answer is quite simple. It provides some kind of benefit to our blue skills. There are actually two different types of skill linking which we can do when we combo, namely linking black skills into blue skills, and then linking blue skills with each other. We've already briefly talked about how to link black skills into blue skills, but why? When you link a first stance black skill into a blue skill of the same type, you will activate what is called a form link, which will grant a 50% final damage buff to that blue skill, making it significantly stronger than it would be without linking. The only exception to this is for burst combo skills, which will be granted an additional 100% final damage when being linked to a second stance black skill of the same type. Look at how little damage Swirling Tide does here if I use it by itself. However, if I use a black kick skill beforehand, you can see that the damage skyrockets. This is the key to what makes Mo Xuan such a strong class. We essentially have final damage stacking built into our kit. Before we get to linking blue skills, let's quickly talk about this very important skill called Heir of the Divine. Heir of the Divine is a fourth job passive skill that builds off of a third job skill called the Holy Mountain. These skills together are the reason why we want to combo in the first place. They allow us to link our skills together and provide the bonuses that arise from doing so. We won't talk about the Holy Mountain since we've basically already gone over its function, and it essentially gets forgotten at fourth job, so let's go over Heir of the Divine. If we look at the skill's description, we can see here at the bottom that it has two parts, Reincarnation and Divine Fist. Reincarnation will become much more important when we talk about linking blue skills together, so we'll talk about that in a bit, but the important part for now is Divine Fist. Every time we link a black skill into a blue skill, this will give us a stack of Divine Fist. Each stack lasts for 1 minute and will grant an additional 10% base final damage, capping out at a total of 50% with 5 stacks. The great thing about final damage is it is a multiplicative stat, meaning that my final damage, which starts at 93%, doesn't go up to 143, which it would if it was additive. It goes up to over 189% when at max stacks. I feel like it goes without saying, but you want to keep this skill at max stacks at pretty much all times. Before you worry about having to stack this skill before bosses, however, I can assure you that you won't have to, since we have a hyper skill called Strength Within, which is a secret art that will max your combo stacks immediately upon use. So now that we have a good understanding of what Heir of the Divine and Divine Fist does, let's talk about the other function, Reincarnation. Reincarnation is what allows us to link two blue skills together, and will also trigger when linking a black skill into a blue skill. This is what the glow around our gauge signifies. For example, when we use a black punch into a blue punch, this will trigger Divine Fist as well as Reincarnation. If we do nothing from this point, after 3 seconds Reincarnation will expire, but we will keep our Divine Fist stacks. If, however, we decide to link another black skill into a blue skill during that 3 seconds, Reincarnation will collapse and provide one of 2 buffs to the second blue skill used, depending on the alignment of the blue skills that we used. If we used 2 blue skills of the same alignment, meaning either 2 punch skills or 2 kick skills, the second blue skill will receive a 25% cooldown reduction, in addition to the 50 or 100% final damage buff that you would get from the form link. If, however, we use 2 blue skills of opposite alignment, meaning a punch skill into a kick skill or vice versa, the second blue skill will receive an additional 50% final damage, again on top of the 50 or 100% final damage from the form link. If you've been paying attention, you'll probably understand how powerful this can be, but just to be sure, let me show you an example. We're setting up our burst, and we want to go into a burst combo, so naturally we start with a black skill. Let's say we use kick. We link that kick into Tearing Wind, a general blue kick skill. This triggers a form link, which gives Tearing Wind an additional 50% final damage, and activates Reincarnation. Next, we throw 2 black punches, putting us in second punch stance, after which we throw out Howling Storm. Because we linked Howling Storm to a second stance black punch, we're gaining the form link, which provides a 100% final damage boost. On top of that, we've also collapsed Reincarnation, which adds another 50% final damage. And since final damage is a multiplicative stat, these buffs multiply together, as they are technically separate buffs. This almost quadruples the damage output of Howling Storm as compared to just using the skill by itself. These 2 types of blue skill linking are called cooldown or CD comboing and final damage or FD comboing, simply as a way to communicate the type of buff that you're trying to achieve when comboing. In almost all instances, you'll want to use final damage comboing. However, there are definitely some niche use cases for cooldown comboing, like when you skip the cooldown of Howling Storm. Now that we have a good understanding of how Reincarnation works, I just want to quickly go back to our gauge to fully explain how the outer glow works, since I didn't really explain it too well before. The outer glow has 2 parts, and both of them give you information on what effect your Reincarnation combos are going to have. If you prep Reincarnation with a punch combo, you will see the glow point upward, like so. Whereas if you prep it with a kick combo, the glow will point downward. Now when you collapse Reincarnation, you'll see one of 2 animations. If you see the glow do a soft circle and kind of absorb back into itself, this means you've performed a cooldown reduction combo. If, however, you see the sharp explosion animation, this indicates that you've properly performed a final damage combo. Now, I know Mo can seem very complicated, but it's really great that we have all these visual aids that help us to see what we're actually accomplishing without necessarily having to run BAs and test everything. And it's great for helping to learn the class. Okay, that was a lot to go over, so I hope you're still with me. Of course, if you have any questions about any of the information in this video, you can definitely ask away in the comments. I also stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/thesqueech, and I'm also streaming right here on YouTube most days. So you can always pop into stream sometime to ask me questions live, where I can give you more detailed explanations and show examples in real time. I also have a Discord server, which I'll link in the description if you want to ask questions whenever I'm not live. I'm always happy to answer questions there, and we've got a great community building full of helpful people who can help you with any Mo Xuan questions or any Maplestory questions in general if I'm not available. While we let all of that information digest, let's talk about something a bit lighter and go over Mo Xuan's movement. Mo Xuan has 4 main movement skills in our kit that allow us to do some pretty cool stuff and dodge boss mechanics with rapid precision. All of the skills we'll talk about in this section fall under secret arts, which we've briefly gone over before. First off, we have a very long single flash jump, also known as air weaving, which I believe is one of the longest flash jumps in the game. This distance can be mitigated, like most flash jumps, by simply delaying the second jump input a little bit. And the skill itself is keybindable if you want even more precise movement. Next is our up jump, also known as Dancing Leap. Now, Mo's up jump is honestly nothing to write home about. In fact, I believe it's actually one of the shortest in the game alongside Lin. However, The benefit to our up jump is that it is a key bindable skill that can be used while grounded. It comes out incredibly quick and can be used in a pinch to dodge mechanics like Lotus Floor Laser and other ground-based attacks. One interesting piece of movement tech with Mo Xuan that you can use when getting started is to add your up jump to its own macro. This will allow you to buffer your up jump while in the air so that it triggers immediately when you land on the ground. As I said, this is helpful when getting started, but I strongly encourage you to learn the timing of pressing up jump when you land on your own, since the buffer is very long and can sometimes throw you into undesirable mechanics if you miss input or have to change your mind before you land. As you can see here, I have my up jump in its own macro, and if I press the key once and I hold it slightly too long, by the time I land, that buffered input will still be there and will launch me back up. So this can be really detrimental, so like I said, strongly recommend learning the timing of just using it without a macro. Next is probably my favorite movement skill in our kit, our dash, also known as arrow flight. If you've seen my extreme Lotus solo, you'll know I like to use this skill a lot and use it to dodge a lot of boss mechanics. Mo Xuan's dash shares a lot of similarities with Lin's dash if you've played Lin before, but with a few notable differences. Mostly that it doesn't do damage. Our dash is a charge dash, meaning it has a certain amount of times it can be used in quick succession with a short recharge time of 4 seconds once you've used a charge. This number in the bottom right of the skill icon will show you how many charges you have, and will have a gray overlay that will deplete, showing the time until the next charge is available. You will have to manage these charges when bossing. However, unless you're spamming your dash, you shouldn't really have to worry much about running out. Although this can and will happen sometimes when things get hectic. I recommend you put your dash on your hotbar so that you can see how many charges you have left with a quick glance. Mo Xuan's dash can be used to move forward in the direction that your character is facing, as well as in all 4 non-cardinal directions, meaning diagonally up and diagonally down. You can dash up through platforms as well as down through platforms, even when grounded. And as a heads up, the dash will not lock you to platforms like other class dash skills. This can be helpful to get yourself out of harm's way without being locked to the platform you're standing on. However, make sure you learn the dash distance, because you can throw yourself off of platforms and fall into other mechanics that might end up creating a worse outcome. Namely, in Lotus P2, you can throw yourself off the top left platform into the lasers below and lose a life. It should be noted that there are no iframes during your dash, so if you get hit at any point while moving, you will take damage and/or status effects. If used at the correct time, however, the dash can be used as a pseudo super stance, allowing you to avoid getting kicked by super knockback attacks. You will, however, still receive any stun effects that come with that kick. You can also chain your dash into or out of a flash jump. However, unlike Lin's dash, it will unfortunately not reset your flash jump, so keep that in mind. One trick I like to do is to dash up diagonally to dodge a mechanic, and then turn around midair and flash jump back to where I started to continue dealing damage. This will take some time to get the correct timing, but if you put in some practice, you'll get it in no time. One last important thing to keep in mind is that Mo Xuan's dash can sometimes get stuck on uneven ground, which can be annoying, but you won't really ever have to deal with this in bosses outside of Gloom, but it's definitely good to know. Finally, we have our backstep, also known as flash step. Mo Xuan's backstep is an incredibly useful skill that admittedly I don't use as much as I should. Just like with our dash, our backstep does not lock you to platforms, so definitely keep the same warnings in mind. This skill will force you backwards very quickly, allowing you to dodge lots of mechanics, and just like our dash, can also be used as a pseudo super stance. It can also be used immediately following a dash to basically cut the dash distance in half, although you will still travel the full distance of the dash and move back to the halfway point with the backstep. This does not cancel the dash, so keep that in mind. With all that said, the single best part about our backstep is that it is functionally a teleport skill. You can use the backstep to go right through boss mechanics and take no damage or status effects, which can be incredibly useful in a lot of scenarios. The dash does have a 6-second cooldown, so keep that in mind. However, this is affected by cooldown reduction and cooldown skip, so it can be used in quick succession if it skips. As with other skills, I recommend putting it on your hotbar so that you can see if it skips or not. And that's it for our movement. Not a ton of skills, but there are some awesome ways you can use the kit we have to keep yourself out of harm's way and keep uptime on bosses. Next, we'll go over our training. If you've heard anything about Mo Xuan besides its unethical damage spread, you've probably heard that Mo Xuan has some of the laziest farming in the game. And this can be true, but there are some caveats for sure. Let me introduce you to the skill that everyone knows and loves, Key Projection, or as I like to call them, the lads. Key Projection is a toggleable secret art that, when activated, creates projections around you that will periodically attack mobs and boss monsters. Each of these attacks are a single target and will attack every 1.5 seconds. If you have the 6th job mastery for this skill, every 10 attacks from Key Projection, you will get a big attack that will deal additional damage to one enemy. The main selling point of this skill is that it does not require you to attack to proc the skill. It will simply do damage on its own. This could be a problem for boss box rooms, as you've probably seen. However, thankfully, this was patched in a recent update. Key Projection will proc Soul Janus in both Dusk and Dawn forms, and this is why people say Mo Xuan is the laziest farmer, second maybe to Demon Slayer. You can simply place your summons and stand around and your lads will do all the work for you. This is still affected by still lock, so you will need to move around every 30 to 35 seconds while training, but even this isn't much to stress about. With all that being said, this farming method requires a decent amount of damage to be used to its fullest ability, especially when using Dusk, as your lads will need to one-shot every mob in order to activate the second Dusk proc and full clear the map. I used this training method for a long time, but as someone who actually enjoys training in Maple, I know I'm insane. I generally just use Kick now and rely on the lads whenever my hands need a break, or if I need to quickly tab out for some reason while streaming. Last thing to mention is that since we are a pirate class, we have access to loaded dice in 5th job, which you can use to get an additional 30% EXP training if you select number 6. Mo Xuan doesn't have any class summons, so beside using our combo skills and a couple of FMAs that we will talk about soon, that's basically it for training on Mo Xuan. If you'd like me to make a video going over training rotations that I used all the way up to Carcion, let me know in the comments, and that is definitely something that I can do if there's interest. But with that, let's move on to one of the major highlights of Mo Xuan, the burst. Mo Xuan's burst is probably one of the major selling points of the class, as if there weren't enough already. We are definitely a DPM class, but our burst packs a huge punch. Get it?
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
And is certainly worth learning if you want to play this class. In this section, I'll go over all of the relevant skills and combos you'll need to get the most out of your burst. One thing to keep in mind is that Mo Xuan has a lot of player expression baked into the class. There is no one right way to do anything, from DPM to burst. While there are some best practices, you can burst in basically any order you want, provided you use the right skills and combos within your burst window. The way I burst is different from the way other Mo Xuans burst, and you might find the way I do it doesn't fit your playstyle, and that's fine. I will show you my burst rotation, but you can feel free to swap things up as you see fit. With that out of the way, let's dive on in. Mo Xuan has 5 main burst skills, not including our combo skills or our ascent. These include Black Wind, Beneath Heaven, the Conquered Self, the Opened Gate, and of course our origin skill, Jianghu Dragon. If you remember in the beginning, I mentioned soul arts. This is where they all come into play. All 5 of these skills, as well as our ascent skill, Where Destiny Falls, are all soul art skills. This is very important to keep in mind when discussing our burst, because of some of the interactions our skills have during our burst, namely with the opened gate, but we'll get to that. Let's first get started by talking about our two burst damage skills, Black Wind and Beneath Heaven. These two skills are fairly similar in function and essentially boil down to being iframed full map attacks. Black Wind is a 60-second cooldown, quick damage skill that will give you about 2 seconds of invincibility when used. There isn't a whole lot else to say, except that you'll be using this skill during every burst and mini burst, and can be used to iframe certain attacks that can happen while a boss is bound during your burst. Beneath Heaven is very similar, except for the fact that it is a 2-minute cooldown skill, so you'll only be using this one during your main burst. Beneath Heaven has a very long animation lock of around 3 seconds, however this can be animation cancelled with either Key Shield, a skill we'll get to soon, or Hero's Will. I'll go over animation cancelling more towards the end of this video when I talk more about general Mo Xuan strategies and techniques. Back to Beneath Heaven, this skill will give you a 4-second iframe and is also quite useful for dodging boss mechanics during your burst along with its big dump of damage. Next we have the Conquered Self. This skill essentially gives a massive buff to your ki projection for the duration of your burst, giving the lads an extra 55% damage, along with doubling your maximum number of active projections. There's not a whole lot more to say about this skill since it's entirely passive damage during your burst, but you'll want to use the Conquered Self during every 2-minute burst. Next up, we have our single most important burst skill, the Opened Gate. Besides our burst combo final damage stacking, this skill is the main reason why our burst does so much damage. Without the 6th job boost to this skill, the Opened Gate will last for 20 seconds, making all of your attacks critical, which they should already be since you have 100% crit rate, right? Right? Jokes aside, the more important element of this skill is what it does to our combo skills. Upon activation, it will provide a flat 15% crit damage boost to our entire kit, along with boosting the damage of all blue and black skills by 350%. And it will add an additional 2 lines to every blue and black skill attack. This, however, does not apply to soul arts, so you'll want to use as many black and blue skills during this buff as you possibly can. The only exception to this is that you'll want to use Beneath Heaven and Black Wind while this skill is active, because the boost you get from these skills during your roar will outweigh the damage loss from the time used to cast these skills. We'll go over what combos you want to get off while the Open Gate is active when we get to our burst rotation, but just keep in mind that this skill is very important to our burst and you'll want to use it every 2-minute burst. Next we have our Ascent skill, Where Destiny Falls. Now, while Ascent skills aren't burst skills, I couldn't really find a better place to slot this one in, so here we are. Mo Xuan's Ascent isn't really anything special, as it's only one part and doesn't have any extra iframes beyond the one. However, our Ascent does do a fairly decent amount of damage, so you'll want to use all 3 charges of it during bosses. It's important to note that no Ascent skills are affected by active buffs or debuffs, so you'll want to use these charges whenever you have no other buffs up in order to not waste damage. This isn't a hard rule or anything though. As long as you're not using any Ascents during your active burst window, you'll be fine. All Ascent skills bypass any damage reduction or damage reflect a boss may have, so you can use this for bosses like Gloom to skip the first minute wait and force him to open early, given you have enough damage, or to absolutely wipe the floor with a catchy because we all know that boss sucks. Last and certainly least, we get to Mo Xuan's origin skill, Jianghu Dragon. Look, I'm not even going to pretend that we have a good origin because we don't. This thing is basically a glorified bind, but it definitely still does some damage, and you'll still want to use it, so we gotta talk about it. Mo Xuan's origin burst is incredibly backloaded, which is actually one of its saving graces. In the event a boss teleports when you activate your origin, you won't miss out on any damage. And there's the added benefit of being able to bind later during the skill's duration, giving you more time to do damage after the animation ends. Mo Xuan's origin also provides us with a 2-minute buff that prevents our combo stacks from decreasing while the buff is active. This isn't really something you're going to notice much in bossing, but it's good to know about for sure. Since our origin skill is a soul art, you do not want to use it during the open gate, or at the very least you want to use it as late into the open gate as you possibly can. This means yes, we origin outside of our roar window, and you pretty much only want to have your 60-second buffs like Goddess Blessing active when you use it. This can be done a couple of different ways, which we will go over in the burst rotation segment. On the bright side though, the animation for our origin is actually really cool and one of my favorites in the game, honestly. And if you like skills that sound like they do a lot of damage, then you've come to the right place. Now that we've gone over our class-specific burst skills, let's talk about the common skills that are important for a burst. Aura of Destiny is basically just epic adventure if you've ever played an explorer class. It's our hyper skill damage boost that lasts for 60 seconds and provides an extra 10% damage. You'll want to use this every main burst, and since every class has one, it's not super exciting, so we'll move on. Next, we have Maple World Goddess's Blessing. Again, this is a pretty common skill amongst most jobs, and is the same skill you'd use on an explorer or resistance class. It provides a 400% buff to Maple Warrior's stat boost and gives 20% damage for 60 seconds. You will also want to use this for your main burst every 2 minutes. Next, we have Overdrive. This is a common 5th job pirate skill that is kinda complicated, but you don't really ever have to think about it. When activated, this will give you a 28-second buff, which is affected by buff duration, that will provide additional attack based on 80% of your weapon's current attack power. Once the skill ends, however, it will go on a cooldown for an additional 32 seconds, 60 seconds in total from the moment that you cast the skill, during which it will reduce your attack power by 15% of your weapon's current attack power. You'll want to use this during every burst and mini burst, and while it sounds like a weird downside, you will probably never notice it. Next, we have Ring of Samsara. I'm gonna be honest, I think the way this skill is designed is incredibly stupid, but since it's important for our burst, I will still go over it. This skill gives you the option to choose between 4 different buffs when you use it. Once you choose the buff you want, it will be applied to a second skill called Power of Destiny, which is the skill you'll actively use during your burst. Your buff options are 20% damage, 30% IED, 30 flat attack and magic attack, or 30% normal monster damage. If it isn't obvious, in all cases, you want to pick the damage buff. You will literally never use any other buff from this skill. The main reason I wanted to talk about it though is to warn you of the single biggest downside of this skill, its cooldown. Now, Power of Destiny is fine, it simply has a 2-minute cooldown like all other skills, but Ring of Samsara is a completely different beast. Once you choose which buff you want, you will not be able to reselect until the following daily reset. This means if you pick the wrong buff right after reset, you will have to wait 24 hours to swap to a different skill. In the long run, it's not a huge deal since it's only 20% damage, but I wanted to warn you to make sure that you're careful and select the right buff because you're stuck with whatever choice you make for a whole day. Anyway, rant over. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Let's move on to our final skill, Terms and Conditions. If you've played any class in Maplestory before, you know this one. It's simply a 60-second cooldown, 10-second duration buff that grants 60% damage while active. This is the Link skill that comes when making an Angelic Buster character, and you'll want to use it during every burst and mini burst. One important thing to note is that it is affected by buff duration, so you'll likely get some extra time out of it whenever you use it. Okay, I hope you're still following, because now we're finally going to go over our skill sequences and burst rotations. Before we get started on burst rotation, let's quickly go over our skill sequences. This is where there can be some differences depending on how you like to perform your origin burst, but in most cases, you'll only be using either 2 or 4 sequences. For our origin burst, since we want to use our origin outside of the opened gate, you can either use it before the rest of your burst or after. If you use it before, you'll want to make an origin sequence that you'll pop before casting your origin that will include Strength Within, Divine Fist Disciples, Aura of Destiny, Power of Destiny, and Goddess Blessing. Then you will make another sequence that will include the rest of your burst buffs, which will be the Opened Gate, the Conquered Self, Overdrive, Terms and Conditions, and finally your ring activation, which will be Roar during your main burst. You may be wondering to yourself, what is Divine Fist Disciples? You never mentioned that one, Newt. The main reason I haven't mentioned it yet is because it does literally nothing for you as the Mo Xuan at all. This is strictly a party buff and will give your party members 8% critical damage, plus an extra 2% if you have max stacks of Heir of the Divine, totaling at 10%. This is why you want to place it after Strength Within, because that will max your stacks, providing the best buff to your party members. This buff will last for 20 seconds, but is affected by buff duration. Okay, back to sequences. Sorry we got off track there. When using Origin Burst, you'll want to cast this first sequence before Origin, and then cast the second immediately following your Origin, and continue the rest of your burst. Whether or not you want to Origin before or after, you'll want to create these next two sequences. If you want to know, I prefer to Origin afterward and skip the previous two sequences. However, I thought it was important to share all of the possibilities with you so that you can decide for yourself which is the way you'd like to play. So for your 2-minute burst, which you'll be using for non-Origin burst if you decide to use Origin sequences, you're going to make a long sequence that will include Strength Within, Aura of Destiny, Power of Destiny, Goddess Blessing, Divine Fist Disciples, the Opened Gate, the Conquered Self, Overdrive, Terms and Conditions, and finally Ring Activation. You will also be using Roar during this sequence. Finally, your last sequence will be for Mini Burst, and this will simply include Overdrive, Terms and Conditions, and Ring Activation. You will want to use Weapon Jump during this sequence. Now, the reason I say Ring Activation for these sequences is that there's actually a separate skill called Ring Activation that will activate whichever ring you are currently wearing. While you can put each ring skill into specific sequences, it just makes things unnecessarily complicated because you'll have to swap rings to add the different skills to each sequence, and this just makes it easier. Also, there was a recent KMS update that essentially made Weapon Jump obsolete, and this way I can future-proof this video. Alright, that's it for sequences. Let's finally get into our burst rotation. In the interest of not repeating myself and taking even longer to explain this, I won't be including black skills when talking through our burst combos. However, if you need a refresher, you can go back and rewatch the section on combos. You can just assume if I tell you to use a general blue skill, that you're linking it with its associated first stance black skill, and if I tell you to use a burst combo skill, you will be linking it with the associated second stance black skill. I will, however, add visual aids that will include the black skills in the combo chain so that things don't become too confusing. I like to think of Mo Xuan's burst as block-based. Essentially, you'll have 4 blocks that can pretty much be used in any order, followed by general combo skills to fill out the duration of your roar. These blocks are made up by the Howling Storm combo, the Crashing Earth combo, Black Wind, and Beneath Heaven. You can use them in that order, or you can swap it up so that you use Howling Storm last. It all depends on what you find more comfortable. For me, this is how I burst. I'll pop my 2-minute sequence and immediately go into Howling Storm combo. So I'll use Tearing Wind into Howling Storm, followed immediately by Black Wind. Once I regain control of my character, which only takes a second, I'll go into the Crashing Earth combo, which is made up of Erupting Flame into Crashing Earth. From here, I will use Beneath Heaven and cancel it with either Hero's Will or Key Shield. Now that all 4 blocks are done, I go into general comboing. The order that I've found works the best is to use Tearing Wind into Righteous Thunder to extend the amount of time the boss is bound for, followed by Erupting Flame into Swirling Tide to get one last big dump of damage before your roar ends. At this point, you should have about 5 seconds or so left on the open gate, depending on hexa level, and here's where I have to make a decision based on the circumstances that I'm in. If I'm party bossing, I'm essentially going to waste a few seconds of my open gate buff to use my origin. That way I can ensure that the boss will stay bound for my party members to continue doing damage. If I'm solo bossing, however, I'll usually take those couple seconds to use any skills that skipped during my burst, or just get some extra punches off in order to maximize damage before I use origin. This does come with some inherent risk, however, because the boss will become unbound for a few seconds before you use your origin, so keep that in mind. And that's pretty much the whole rotation. It's honestly not as complicated as it sounds once you get used to everything. However, I strongly encourage you to play around with this and find what order feels best for you. If you're doing a non-origin 2-minute burst, you can basically just take origin out of the rotation and pretty much nothing else changes. In the event that you do decide you want to use origin first, you'll want to pop your pre-ori sequence, followed by your origin. Once the animation ends, you'll pop your burst sequence, and send the rest of your rotation as if you were just doing a normal 2-minute burst. Now, in the event that Howling Storm skips its cooldown, you'll want to use cooldown reduction comboing if you decide to use the skill again. That way it will still be up for your next burst or mini burst. If it skips 2 to 3 times or more, I would honestly recommend holding onto it at that point, as even with cooldown reduction, you will still be delaying your next burst or mini burst, which can complicate things in a party setting. Now, if you're solo bossing and you're not min clearing, feel free to go wild. Just send as many Howling Storms as you want. If it's not going to mess up your potential to clear, I say every once in a while, have a little fun. Send Howling Storm 5 or 6 times if it skips. It honestly provides so much dopamine when this happens, so I recommend at least trying it once. And there you have it. You've completed a Mo Xuan burst. See, it's honestly not that difficult when you know what you're doing. This is why I call Mo Xuan a knowledge gap class, very similar to Zero, because the hardest part of both of these classes is just figuring out what the hell you're supposed to do. And then from there isn't a whole lot of technical skill needed outside of just putting in some practice. Before I end this section though, let's quickly talk about our mini burst. Mini burst on Mo Xuan is fairly similar to our main burst, just without a few key things. You'll want to start off by using your mini burst sequence, and from there you're only going to be able to use Howling Storm combo, Crashing Earth combo, and Black Wind. Just like your burst, you can pretty much do these in any order. Now, this may be a hot take, but based on the conversations I've had with other Mo Xuan mains, I believe it's quite common. But if you have a liberated Genesis weapon, I recommend you save your Genny iframe for your mini burst. Since we have 2 massive iframes to use during your burst, saving Genny for our mini can ensure that we can get off all the damage safely without having to worry about boss mechanics. This is, of course, entirely up to personal preference, and I'd suggest, as with everything else, play around with this and see how you prefer to do it. Personally, I will sometimes save my Black Wind cast for the end of my mini burst so that I can extend the Genny iframe a little bit in the event that I was a little late to starting my mini after pressing my Genny iframe. Finally, we'll go over survivability on Mo Xuan, and I'll give you some general tips which I've learned while playing this amazing class. For survivability, Mo Xuan has a fair bit in our kit. However, I've honestly already gone over most of it, but let's quickly recap. For iframes, we have our 2 burst skills, Black Wind and Beneath Heaven, which you'll honestly only want to use to ignore mechanics during burst. These skills do way too much damage to use off burst, so you don't want to save these for iframes. Additionally, we have our class bind Key Disruption. You may be thinking, why would you use our class bind as an iframe? And the answer is because it is an absolutely terrible bind. It's single target and does not require a valid target, so you can completely miss the bind, leading to all sorts of problems. With this in mind, I definitely encourage you to use Urta Nova from 5th Job to bind instead. I recommend using this iframe as a last resort, however, because since this is a bind, you can throw off your bind timer, like you may have seen in my X-Lot solo in P2, and have to burst without a bind, which can be very tricky. Finally, we have probably our best survivability skill, Key Shield. This skill works very similarly to Bishop's Divine Protection, and is essentially a diminishing damage reduction shield. When cast, the next hit you take will have its damage reduced by 100%, meaning most attacks will only deal 1 damage. It is important to know that this is a flat 100%, so you will still die to boss mechanics that deal more than 100%, like the FMAs in Black Mage for example. Every additional hit you take while the skill is active will be reduced by 15% less than the last hit. So first hit will reduce incoming damage by 100%, second will be 85%, third will be 70%, and so on until you finally reach 0 and the skill ends. This can be incredibly useful in basically all bossing scenarios to help you escape bad patterns and ensure you survive the chaos. You will, however, take status effects during the skill's duration, so unfortunately this cannot be used to avoid things like Black Mage curses. As for general tips for Mo Xuan, the main thing I want to talk about is animation cancelling. In this most recent update in March 2026, we have been given the ability to animation cancel every skill in our kit with Key Shield and Hero's Will. Previously, we were only able to cancel Beneath Heaven with Hero's Will alone, so this came as a very welcome change from the community. I definitely recommend animation cancelling Beneath Heaven since it is the longest animation locking skill that doesn't take place during a bind. However, you have the freedom to cancel whichever skills you like. Whether that be Black Wind or the final punch from Howling Storm, definitely play around with this and see which cancels you'd prefer to use. Next up is a small one, but make sure to set your dice to 5 when bossing, as this will give you an extra 20% damage with 100% uptime. This can be added to auto buff on pets, which I highly recommend doing, so you don't have to use even more keyboard space. One important thing to know is that in the event that all of your blue skills are on cooldown, you can just spam your Black Punch skill, as this does the most damage between your black skills. Just make sure to weave in a kick before you start comboing again, so that you know for sure what stance you're in. Next, for some interesting tech you can do with Mo Xuan's kit. First off, you can use your backstep to cancel any of your Black Punch or kick skills. This can be very valuable when trying to escape boss patterns, to ensure you aren't stuck in place. If you have your up jump keybinded, you can kind of use it to cancel the animation lock of grounded skills, such as Crashing Earth and Beneath Heaven. Black Wind used to be part of this, however it is no longer a grounded skill, so it doesn't really matter a whole lot. I'm not sure how useful this is anymore with the new animation cancel tech. However, this can allow you to dodge floor-based attacks while keeping up your damage, and can be used to carry momentum into these attacks if you're moving beforehand. Admittedly, the timing is very tight, and I've played around with this a bit, but I don't think I've ever used this tech in actual bossing scenarios, but fun to know at the very least. The final thing I will yap about before I let you go is my biggest recommendation. Please put your Black Punch and kick skills into their own individual macros. If you've ever found Mo Xuan comboing to be clunky and slow, definitely try this out. Not only will it speed up your comboing, but it will also allow you to slightly buffer your attacks, which makes a world of difference when you're comboing. Do note, however, that there is currently a bug that can sometimes stop your black skills from activating when in macros. This is due to the fact that Mo Xuan originally comes from a region that doesn't have 0 attack speed, and this essentially causes the attacks to come out so fast that they don't register. Hopefully this will be fixed in a future update. However, even with this bug, I would still recommend putting your black skills into their own macros, as the smoother comboing more than makes up for the lost damage here and there from skills not activating. And with that, we've reached the end of today's guide. I really hope you were able to learn something. I tried to write this in a way that no matter how long you've been playing the class, you might be able to learn a thing or two. Mo Xuan has rapidly become my favorite class in Maplestory by a long margin, and so I'm excited to be able to have shared what I know about this amazing class with you. I want to give a massive shout out to the Mo Xuan Discord, and particularly to Draconite, who has been keeping all of the guides in the Discord as up to date as possible and has honestly been carrying this community on his back since even before the class came out. If you have any questions about this class, you should definitely check out his guides in the Discord, which I have linked in the description below. I am also happy to answer any questions you may have in the comments, and if you'd like to ask me questions live, I stream on Twitch and right here on YouTube basically every day besides Tuesdays now, so feel free to drop in and ask away. I really appreciate you watching to the end, and if you enjoyed this video and learned something, a like would be even more appreciated. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future content. I've got a lot of awesome stuff planned, so you won't want to miss it. Anyways, that's all for me, friends. Thank you so much again for watching. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.